I should have seen it coming. 30 years of loyalty meant nothing the moment they decided I was too old. I remember that Monday morning vividly. I wore my usual navy suit, crisp and precise, and arrived 15 minutes early. Like I always did. This office, this empire, used to be mine in everything but title. I built the workflows, mentored the executives, handled crises when others were still learning how to draft emails. I was Margaret Ellis, the one who held the place together. Or so I thought. That morning, however, something was off. Eyes darted, away when I entered. Whispers died as I walked past. Even Ashley, my assistant for nearly a decade, could barely look me in the eyes when she handed me my meeting schedule. It was almost comical, like watching children plot against their teacher, thinking they were being discreet. I shrugged it off at first. Corporate politics weren't new to me. I knew how power shifted and alliances changed. Still, I wasn't prepared for what came next. At exactly 10 a.m., I walked into the boardroom. The usual suspects were there. Nathan Pierce, the newly appointed CEO who thought wearing sneakers with a suit made him innovative. Sarah Lynn, the 35-year-old visionary who spoke in buzzwords and couldn't read a balance sheet to save her life, and the rest of the board members who I had watched grow up in this very building. They were once interns, assistants, junior managers. I had shaped them, guided them, protected them. Nathan cleared his throat, avoiding my eyes. "Margaret, we appreciate everything you've done for the company," he started, voice rehearsed, and void of any genuine emotion. My stomach tightened. "However," he continued, "we believe it's time for new leadership. The board has decided to move in a different direction." I stared at him, not comprehending. "Are you firing me?" "Not firing," Sarah chimed in, flashing her plastic smile. "Transitioning. You'll receive a generous retirement package. This is about evolving, Margaret, about fresh ideas, new energy." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. 30 years of sacrificing weekends, holidays, personal life, erased with a single sentence. Worse, they were pretending it was a favor. Retirement? At 58? I was still sharp, still hungry, yet here they were, shoving me out like expired milk. I sat still, frozen, for what felt like an eternity. Then I spoke, my voice cold. "So this is it? After everything I've given, you're discarding me like a broken stapler?" Nathan squirmed, but Sarah didn't flinch. "It's not personal, Margaret. You've had a good run. Now it's time for others to take the reins." A good run. Those words burned into my soul. A good run. As if I was a racehorse ready to be put down. I stood slowly, smoothing my skirt with deliberate grace. No tears, no begging. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. "You're making a mistake," I said calmly, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "But I won't argue. Just remember this day." Sarah scoffed. "Let's not make this dramatic." "Oh, Sarah, you had no idea what drama really looked like." I left the room without another word, ignoring the hollow attempts of some board members to appear sympathetic. I didn't want their pity. I wanted their downfall. As I packed up my office that afternoon, a parade of employees stopped by. Some offered hugs, some whispered apologies. Others didn't even dare to meet my gaze. But the message was clear. I was done. Forgotten. Erased from the very company I had built from blood, sweat, and far too many sleepless nights. That night, I sat in my quiet home, sipping a glass of Merlot, staring at the boxes containing my career. Bitterness clung to me like smoke. But somewhere between the first and second glass, bitterness turned into resolve. They thought they could push me out, and I'd fade quietly into irrelevance. They thought wrong. I didn't sleep much that night. My mind raced, not with grief, but with strategy. I wasn't ready to be a relic. Not yet. They wanted fresh ideas? Fine. I would give them something they'd never forget. But first, I needed to disappear. Disappear and rebuild. I wasn't planning revenge out of spite. No. This was about respect. about reclaiming what they tried to steal from me. I knew the company's weaknesses. I knew every skeleton in every closet. I knew which contracts were fragile, which departments were over-leveraged, and which board members had closets full of secrets. They had declared war. They just didn't know they had already lost. By the time my glass was empty, so was my patience. I typed out a simple status update on LinkedIn before shutting my laptop for the night, excited to begin a new chapter. Sometimes being underestimated is the greatest advantage. I smiled to myself as I clicked post. They had no idea, but they would. Oh, they would. They expected me to disappear, and for a while, I did. Not by choice. The first months were brutal. Waking up without a purpose, without meetings, deadlines, or people needing my approval felt like losing oxygen. My calendar, once booked months in advance, was empty. No emails, no calls. Silence. Deafening and humiliating silence. At 58, I became invisible overnight. The corporate world moves fast and cruel. Invitations stopped coming. Recruiters ghosted me. Former colleagues suddenly became too busy to grab coffee. The industry I had given everything to had tossed me aside like last season's fashion. They didn't care about my experience. To them, I was outdated, replaceable. I spent weeks stuck in that bitter cycle, watching daytime TV, refreshing my inbox, wondering if this was really how my story would end. Forgotten and irrelevant. But the thing about hitting rock bottom is, once you're there, you start to see things clearly. One night, about 3 months after they pushed me out, I found myself staring at the company's quarterly report, out of habit more than anything else. And that's when it hit me. They were floundering. Revenue was down. Employee turnover was up. Costs had ballooned under Nathan's fresh ideas. They slashed veteran salaries, outsourced critical roles to cheap contractors, and alienated loyal clients in pursuit of trendier, riskier markets. Sarah's flashy marketing campaigns won awards. But not customers. They were amateurs playing CEO, and for the first time since my exit, I didn't feel anger. I felt opportunity. That night, I stayed up till dawn. I built spreadsheets, combed through financial filings, read every analyst report and trade journal I could find. Patterns emerged. Weaknesses. Desperation. They were vulnerable. But I wasn't ready to strike. Not yet. No, this would take time, precision, patience. I spent the next year reshaping myself. I took consulting gigs, small, under-the-radar work that kept my mind sharp and my name circulating quietly. I built new relationships with private equity, players, investment bankers, and industry insiders. I listened more than I spoke, absorbed everything. I attended shareholder meetings, anonymously, of course. Through shell companies and blind trusts, I began buying stock. Not much at first, a few thousand shares here and there, enough to get voting rights, but not enough to attract attention. By my 60th birthday, I controlled over 7% of the company. Quietly, invisibly. I also knew their secrets. Nathan's pet project had become a financial black hole. Sarah had alienated a key client, one whose departure would trigger contractual penalties they couldn't afford. Morale was at an all-time low. Their arrogance blinded them. They didn't even realize the ticking time bomb they were sitting on. But I did, and I waited. The market did the rest. A recession hit. Credit tightened. Investors grew restless. Share prices fell. Suddenly, my 7% became leverage. Other shareholders started whispering. Maybe, they thought, it was time for real leadership. Maybe the old ways weren't so outdated after all. Then came the final piece. A private equity firm I had quietly aligned with swooped in and bought another 12% stake during the chaos, with my blessing, of course. Together, we controlled nearly 20% of voting power. Enough to call for a board vote. Enough to rewrite the future. Enough to end them. 2 years after they pushed me out, I sat in my study, sipping tea instead of wine this time, watching the stock ticker scroll across my TV. The company I once ran, the company that discarded me, was circling the drain. and I was holding the lifeline. When my phone rang, it was Nathan. Desperate, panicked. He asked to meet. He sounded small. I let him squirm for a moment before agreeing. As I hung up, I smiled. The quiet years were over. It was time to make some noise. The meeting with Nathan was pathetic. He chose a quiet, overpriced restaurant, the kind of place where executives broker deals and ruin lives over dry-aged steaks and $100 bottles of red. Fitting, really. I arrived precisely on time, dressed in soft gray, understated but sharp. I wanted him to see what control looked like. Nathan, on the other hand, looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. His tie was crooked. His eyes darted nervously as I sat down. "Margaret," he began, voice cracking with forced charm, "it's really good to see you." I didn't bother with pleasantries. "You're bleeding cash, Nathan. Spare me the small talk." His smile faltered instantly. He went straight into pleading. Investors were pulling out. The board was restless. Morale was non-existent. They needed someone who knew how to stabilize things. "You were always the glue, Margaret," he said, desperation leaking from every word. "Maybe you could consult? Help us weather this storm?" I let his words hang in the air, savoring the shift in power. 2 years ago, they tossed me aside like garbage. Now they were crawling back, offering scraps. But I didn't want scraps. I wanted the whole damn table. "I'm not interested in consulting." "Nathan," I said, cool and measured. "I'm interested in controlling." He blinked. "Excuse me?" I leaned forward just enough for my voice to drop into a razor's edge. "You have no leverage. Your debt covenants are about to be breached. Clients are bailing, your stock is tanking. The board is fractured, and investors are circling like vultures. Without me, you're done. You know it. I know it. So let's stop pretending." His face drained of color. For the first time, he understood. This wasn't a lifeline. This was an offer he couldn't refuse. "I want your seat, Nathan," I continued. "I want Sarah's seat, and I want the right to restructure the board." "That's extreme," he stammered. "No," I said flatly. "That's mercy. You should be grateful I'm offering it before the proxy war starts." He sat there, cornered. He knew he had no choice. If he refused, the shareholders I controlled would vote him out anyway. If he accepted, at least he got to save face, for now. By the end of that dinner, the deal was done. I gave him 30 days to announce his voluntary resignation for personal reasons. Sarah would follow soon after, framed as pursuing new opportunities. They would leave quietly, with their severance packages and broken egos, while I stepped back in, not as the old Margaret they once underestimated, but as the savior the company now desperately needed. But eliminating Nathan and Sarah wasn't enough. The rot ran deeper. Over the next weeks, I moved swiftly and ruthlessly. I called in old favors, promoted loyal lieutenants who had been buried under incompetent managers. I renegotiated contracts, cut dead weight, and brought back trusted vendors who knew how to get things done. Every decision I made whispered the same message through the halls. The queen is back, and she's not playing nice anymore. Some resisted, middle managers clinging to power, cronies of the previous regime whispering doubts in break rooms. I let them talk, for a while. Then I started buying silence. Some I offered generous exit packages to, retire early or move aside quietly. Others, I buried with ironclad non-disclosure agreements tied to hefty golden parachutes. And those who truly tested me, I exposed them. Old expense reports, shady hiring practices, ghost projects that never delivered. One by one, they fell. The end of my first 3 months, half the leadership team was gone. Replaced, forgotten. I didn't relish in their downfall. This wasn't petty revenge. This was justice. This was balance restored. The media spun it as a brilliant comeback story. Veteran leader returns to rescue legacy company. The board, desperate to stay afloat, gave me free rein. Employees, the ones who actually mattered, started smiling again. People who once avoided my gaze now sought my approval. I wasn't just running the company again. I was the company. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning, because while I rebuilt from within, I still had unfinished business. Nathan. And Sarah thought they had gotten off easy. They were wrong. When I bought silence, I wasn't just erasing the past. I was buying time. Time to prepare for the final stage. The part where the people who once buried me would watch helplessly as I buried them. In irrelevance, in disgrace, and in memories of a throne they thought they owned forever. Power tastes sweeter when it's taken, not given. For months, I reigned. The board bent to my will. Employees flourished under real leadership again. The bleeding stopped, numbers stabilized. For a brief moment, I almost believed I had restored. Balance, almost. But power doesn't come without enemies, and mine hadn't disappeared. They had simply gone quiet. Too quiet. Nathan, for all his incompetence, wasn't stupid. Neither was Sarah. Their forced resignations bruised egos that had grown fat on applause and empty titles. They didn't vanish into retirement like good little soldiers. They simmered. I first caught whispers through back channels, old contacts, trade shows, private investment circles, and all reporting the same thing. Nathan had teamed up with Sarah. Together, they launched a boutique consulting firm aimed at modernizing legacy corporations. The irony was laughable. The very same duo who nearly drove my company into the ground now peddled themselves as turnaround experts. But it wasn't the company they were after. It was me. At first, I ignored them. Let them play consultants. Let them write thought pieces on LinkedIn and flash fake smiles at conferences. But then, strange things started happening. Vendors I trusted began pulling out of contracts, citing better offers. Key employees resigned suddenly, lured by suspiciously generous packages elsewhere. Clients I'd spent years rebuilding trust with started hesitating on renewals. It didn't take long to trace the pattern. Nathan and Sarah were systematically targeting everything I rebuilt. Not openly, of course. That wasn't their style anymore. This was surgical, calculated. They couldn't take my throne directly, so they chose the next best thing, destabilizing my kingdom from the outside. Worse yet, the market turned against me. A sudden industry-wide slump hit hard. Share prices dipped. Media coverage shifted from glowing comeback stories to skeptical op-eds. Has Margaret Ellis lost her touch? One headline asked with gleeful malice. I stayed calm, at least outwardly. Internally, I was furious. Not scared, no. Fury sharpens the mind. Fear dulls it. I knew I needed to move fast. My first step was tightening my circle. I quietly reshuffled. Key positions again, promoting only those who had proven unwavering loyalty. No more tolerance for opportunists or fence-sitters. You were either with me or against me. Then I went hunting. Discreetly, I hired private investigators, professionals, who specialized in corporate sabotage and competitor espionage. Within weeks, they delivered everything I needed. Emails, recorded calls, proof of Nathan and Sarah's dirty little crusade. They were bribing vendors, poaching staff, whispering poisoned narratives to the press and shareholders. Illegal? Perhaps. Not immoral? Without question. But here's the thing about playing dirty. You better make sure you're better at it than your opponent. And they weren't. I now had ammunition. Enough to bury them in lawsuits, investigations, and public scandal. But I didn't pull the trigger. Not yet. No. Patience was a virtue I had perfected. I wanted them desperate first. Vulnerable. I wanted them exposed for what they really were, petty children playing at kings and queens. So I baited them. I staged weakness. Publicly, I let the media run wild with narratives of my decline. I downplayed successes. I allowed minor issues to linger just long enough for Nathan and Sarah to believe their plan was working. And they did. Their attacks grew bolder, sloppier. They overreached, orchestrating a proxy fight to sway shareholders and force me out. That was their fatal mistake. Because while they were busy plotting their triumphant return, I was securing my final ally. The same private equity firm I had partnered with before, now hungry for control and stability, agreed to increase their stake, aligning entirely with me. On the eve of the shareholder meeting, my silent partner and I controlled nearly 45% of votes. Add loyal insiders, and the math wasn't even close. Still, I played along during the meeting. Let Nathan and Sarah grandstand. Let them pitch their vision. Let them believe they had won, until the votes were tallied. until their faces drained of color as they realized they were crushed. Not just defeated, obliterated, removed permanently. No severance, no soft exits, no pursuing new opportunities. Disgraced and discarded, just like they had once. Done to me. As they walked out, humiliated and in shock, I stood calmly, hands folded, and said only 4 words: "We're done here. Leave." The room went silent. No cheers, no pity, just a reckoning. When the doors closed behind them, I let out a slow breath. The cracks had appeared, yes, but they weren't mine. They belonged to those foolish enough to believe they could undo me. I wasn't just back. I was unbreakable. And now, with my enemies publicly shattered, the true rebuilding could finally begin. But this time, on my terms alone. Silence. That was the first thing I noticed after Nathan and Sarah were gone. The constant hum of defiance, the whispers behind closed doors, the subtle daggers hidden in polite smiles. Gone. In their place was quiet, not the oppressive kind that followed my exile years ago, but a respectful, almost reverent silence. They knew. Everyone in that building now understood who held the reins. No more illusions, no more false kings and queens. I was not sharing power anymore. I was power. The first few weeks after the purge were surgical. There was no celebration, no victory lap. I didn't need confetti to mark the moment. What I needed was compliance, stability, fear, the good kind. The kind that kept everyone sharp and loyal. I summoned the department heads one by one. No assistants, no intermediaries, just me and them, across a small round table in my office. I asked questions, hard questions, numbers, plans, failures. For years, they had grown accustomed to hiding behind flashy reports and vague forecasts. That ended immediately. Those who impressed me stayed. Those who didn't were offered 2 choices: resign with dignity or be removed with prejudice. Most chose wisely. Within 30 days, the executive team was leaner, meaner, and completely mine. I also restructured the board. The days of legacy seats and inherited power were over. Every member now answered to performance metrics I personally devised. Missed targets twice and you were out. No exceptions. Investors responded well. Very well. Stock rebounded sharply. Analysts who once speculated on my downfall began calling me the Iron Architect. Some even romanticized my return, the fallen leader who reclaimed the throne and saved the kingdom. They weren't wrong, but they didn't know the half of it. Internally, I implemented what would become my legacy, the Ellis Protocol. A ruthless yet efficient system that evaluated every aspect of the business weekly. No department was safe, no manager untouchable. Data ruled and loyalty was mandatory. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reshaping everything, in my image. Vendors who wavered during Nathan's sabotage campaign? Blacklisted. Clients who hesitated to renew contracts? Replaced with hungrier competitors? Former employees who defected to join Nathan and Sarah's little rebellion? Persona non grata. Barred from ever setting foot in my empire again. Ruthless? Perhaps, but necessary. Mercy is a luxury reserved for those who aren't trying to rebuild an empire from ashes. I held monthly town halls, personally. Gone were the days of canned emails and distant memos. I spoke plainly, clearly, to everyone from junior analysts to senior directors. I reminded them that this company existed because I refused to let it die. I demanded excellence. In return, I promised loyalty would be rewarded, and it was. Promotions, raises, stock options. Those who aligned themselves with me thrived like never before. The culture shifted rapidly. There was fear, yes, but there was also pride. People liked knowing who was in charge. There were no blurred lines anymore. You either delivered or you disappeared. By the end of the fiscal year, profits shattered previous records. Shareholder value soared. Competitors whispered about my resurgence with envy and awe. Internally, they called me the Queen without rivals. I didn't mind the title. It was accurate. And yet, even in victory, I stayed vigilant. Because ruling isn't just about taking power. It's about keeping it. I spent countless nights in my office, lights dimmed, overlooking the city skyline, alone but content, reflecting on the simple truth that had guided me through every dark moment. Power does not ask for permission. It takes, it molds, it endures. And I intended to endure for a very, very long time. The final piece fell into place when I addressed the board one morning, 6 months after reclaiming the company. From today onward, I announced, voice calm but absolute, this company does not serve trends. It does not chase hype. It serves one purpose, to reflect my vision, my legacy. No one objected. Not because they agreed, though many did, but because they understood. Dissent was obsolete now. Margaret Ellis wasn't just back. I was the company. The power play was over. I had won, and deep down they all knew I would never lose again. Victory is hollow if you leave enemies standing. I knew that. Always knew that. They thought I would stop after taking back the company. Thought power and profit were enough for me. They didn't understand. This wasn't about money. It never was. It was about respect, about punishment, about ensuring that when people spoke my name, they did so with reverence or fear, preferably both. Nathan and Sarah tried to move on, tried to rebuild. Their pathetic little consulting firm limped along, desperately clinging to relevance. They peddled recycled strategies and half-baked innovation workshops to gullible startups. On the surface, they were harmless, but snakes remain snakes, and snakes bite when you look away. I didn't. I watched, quietly, patiently, waiting for them to make a mistake. It came predictably through greed. Their firm began courting one of my company's biggest rivals, a direct competitor who had spent years trying and failing to poach my clients and undercut my market share. Nathan and Sarah saw an opportunity. They pitched a bold, reckless plan to dismantle my hold on the industry, leaked insider knowledge, offered to lure away senior talent, promised shortcuts that, if executed, could weaken my foundations. The eyes. Fools. They still underestimated me. Every email, every call, every shady promise they made, recorded. I had people everywhere. Their clients, informants, their supposed strategic partners, bought and paid for. I let them dig their own graves, for months collecting evidence, building the perfect case. Until finally they crossed the line. Corporate espionage, leaking of proprietary trade secrets, enough to bury them in lawsuits so deep they'd need miners to find daylight again. I didn't go public immediately. No, I wanted them to feel safe first, to believe they had escaped the storm. I waited until they signed the deal with my rival. The ink was barely dry when I unleashed hell. Legal teams descended like wolves, lawsuits in multiple jurisdictions, criminal charges recommended to federal investigators, civil suits designed to freeze every asset they had. Banks pulled credit lines overnight. Partners severed ties in fear. Overnight, their firm went from rising star to radioactive. Within a week, Nathan and Sarah's company was shuttered. Bankruptcy imminent. Reputations obliterated. But I wasn't finished. Publicly, I kept my hands clean. Statements expressed regret over the situation and reaffirmed my company's commitment to ethical business practices. Privately, I made sure no one would touch them again. I called in every favor, every old ally, every former rival I had, humbled over decades. The word spread quietly but firmly. Anyone who hired Nathan or Sarah, anyone who gave them so much as a consulting gig, would be cut off from my empire, permanently. They became pariahs overnight. No job offers, no speaking engagements, nothing. Their LinkedIn profiles went dead. Their phones stopped ringing. Nathan, once the Golden Boy CEO, was reduced to begging recruiters for middle management roles. All declined. Sarah, once the visionary, couldn't get hired to manage a coffee shop. I watched all of this unfold from my office, sipping tea as their worlds collapsed. But even that wasn't enough. I wanted the final blow. I arranged an anonymous tip to a prestigious business magazine. An exposé followed. Front page story. The rise and fall of corporate charlatans, how ambition turned to ashes. Their faces, once beaming from tech conferences and gala events, now plastered beneath headlines of shame. They couldn't walk into restaurants without whispers, couldn't attend industry events without being shunned. They weren't just defeated. They were erased. Exactly as they tried to do to me. I didn't revel in it, not outwardly, no smirks, no speeches. True power doesn't gloat, it just ends you, quietly, completely. That night, alone in my penthouse overlooking the city, I poured myself a glass of wine. Not Merlot, not anymore. Something stronger. I stood at the window, watching the skyline I now owned, and whispered to no one in particular. You should have let me retire. They didn't. And because of that, they no longer existed. The reckoning was complete. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. This was simply the new beginning of a world where no one would ever dare cross Margaret Ellis again. It was always going to end like this. I knew it the moment I first walked out of that boardroom 2 years ago, discarded like yesterday's news. Back then, they thought they were writing my final chapter. They didn't realize they were only giving me a sharper pen. And now, after everything, they stood before me again, broken, hollow, begging. It happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I was reviewing expansion plans, global ambitions, because domestic victory was no longer enough, when my assistant buzzed in. Nathan and Sarah are here, she said, voice laced with disbelief. They don't have an appointment. I could have sent them away. I should have. But something in me wanted to see it. The end of them, up close. Send them in, I said calmly. When the door opened, I barely recognized them. Gone were the designer suits and smug expressions. Nathan looked gaunt, hair disheveled, desperation radiating from every pore. Sarah, the ever-composed Sarah, clung to a worn-out handbag like it was her last possession. Their eyes didn't carry arrogance anymore, only defeat. Margaret, Nathan started, voice cracking. Thank you for seeing us. I didn't offer them seats. They didn't deserve the comfort. They stood awkwardly, shifting from foot to foot like nervous interns on their first day. We've hit hard times, Sarah continued, eyes downcast. You know how the industry is. People talk. No one will work with us. We can't even get interviews, let alone jobs. She trailed off, swallowing her pride. Nathan picked up where she left. We know we made mistakes, big ones. We were foolish. But we're asking for another chance. Any chance. Consulting. Advisory. Hell, we'll even take junior roles. Please, Margaret, you don't have to forgive us. Just help us survive. I let the silence stretch, watching them squirm. These were the same people who once smiled as they pushed me out of my own empire. The same people who leaked, sabotaged, and plotted to destroy everything I built. And now, they were willing to crawl. I stood slowly, walking to the window overlooking the city skyline. They waited behind me, hoping, praying, that the same woman they once deemed too soft, too old, would show mercy. I turned, my expression unreadable. Do you remember, I asked quietly, what you said to me the day you forced me out? They exchanged nervous glances but stayed silent. I didn't need their answers. I already knew. I repeated their words anyway. You've had a good run, Margaret. It's time for new ideas. My voice cut like glass. Nathan looked down. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. But I wasn't done. You didn't just fire me, I continued coldly. You erased me. You turned colleagues against me. You mocked me behind closed doors. You tried to destroy everything I spent my life building, and when you failed, you tried again. And again. I took a step closer, letting every word sink in. Now, you come here asking for scraps? Hoping I've forgotten? Hoping I'll be the bigger person? Nathan opened his mouth, but I raised a hand, silencing him instantly. No. Just one word, but final. Absolute. Their faces crumbled. Whatever hope they carried into my office evaporated instantly. I delivered the final blow with brutal precision. There are no second chances. Not here, not with me. You made your choices. You dug your graves. Now lie in them. Sarah broke first, tears streaming as she whispered, "Please, Margaret, please." Nathan stood frozen, as if the weight of reality had finally crushed whatever delusions remained. I didn't flinch. I didn't pity. They didn't deserve pity. I turned away, signaling to my assistant. "Show them out, permanently." As the doors closed behind them, silence returned. Not uneasy or awkward, peaceful, fitting. I walked back to my desk, the empire I rebuilt shining brightly across the skyline behind me. They came back begging, and I sent them away into oblivion. Not with rage, not with revenge-fueled theatrics. Just cold, calculated justice. The kind only true power delivers. In that moment, I wasn't Margaret Ellis, the woman they once dismissed. I was Margaret Ellis, the woman who buried her enemies and built a throne from their ashes. And as far as I was concerned, their story ended the moment I said no.